Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
We dropped our bombs near Munich and turned off the target back for England. As deep as I could see into Germany, the sky was stained with smoke from the targets, scattered around, smashed and missing and burning. We were going home. Home is when the props stop spinning. I looked around, very tired. From up there it all looked so green and beautiful, and what we had done so sort of horrible. We got our first look at fighters on that Munich hull. There were ring around the roses on all sides for part of the time. "Hell of a scramble out at 9 o'clock, Crone called up. We couldn't tell 109s from P-51s or Focke-Wulfs. We couldn't tell which side was winning or what kind went down. They looked like they were playing around, and then one broke off in a dive that ended when it hit the ground. Jesus, Sharp said. Did you see that? The explosion died away to a bloody glow. Somebody was dead down there. All the way in from the Rhine, it was like that. And that, in that immaculate American accent...
honestly...
Yeah.
I was transported there.
Yeah. So where was I? I was Virginia, Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but considered an educated man, though.
Yes, which of course Bert Stiles was. That is from Serenade to the Big Bird, which for my money is the ultimate in bomber memoirs. It's just so good. And I first read it when I was doing my Normandy book and reread it for this, and it's just fantastic. And I thought actually we'd have a little bit of a look at Bert Stiles and what he was up to during the course of this.
And that you say Normandy, that you looked at this for your Normandy book, not for your Big Week book, I think points us in the direction that this episode is very much headed. Because in a way, we've reached the stage of the 8th Air Force's campaign where Overlord is magnetic north now. All roads lead to Normandy.
Yep.
And I think what we've outlined in the last few episodes is that there's been this bomber force created sort of really on the back of an envelope with some wishful thinking and a blank check, and that it's developed into the 8th Air Force in fits and starts, and finally the taps are on for replacing whatever's lost attrition-wise, which is really the key. And the numbers as we go through 1944 at Mitchell's disposal are absolutely incredible. Beggar belief to only a year before, 9 months before, 6 months before. The scale of the power of the weapon he has at his disposal as the year unfolds is truly amazing. They've tried precision bombing. They've come up against the weather. They've come up against the Luftwaffe, which actually turns out to be sort of hollow, really, once put to the test. They've cracked the problem of fighter escort, not just that you need one, but what it has to do, that it has to free range, and its priority has to be the destruction of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, rather than even the protection of the bomber force. The protection of the bomber, how you protect the bomber force is by destroying the Luftwaffe, not by simply protecting the bomber force. So there's been all of these elements coming into play, and now, just as the weapon is perfected, sorry, Overlord, sorry, boys, whatever ambition you're pursuing, or whatever ambition Bomber Command are pursuing, it's all on hold for the invasion of Europe, Northwest Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes and no.
But this is the interesting thing, isn't it? It's because that's like the point-blank directive after Casablanca, which appears to lay out, actually, the way things have got to go. There is quite a lot of wiggle room for interpretation, and also, we are talking about the 8th Air Force here, but it's no surprise that the man running Bomber Command is also extremely headstrong, believes in what he's doing, won't take no for an answer, and also will interpret his orders as loosely as possible in order to get what he wants.
But actually, to his spots is cut from exactly the same cloth. He's also as kind of ideological and determined to kind of pursue his own way. So. Well, we'll come on to that in a minute. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I wrote Big Week all those years ago because I felt that this was an absolute tipping point and really the kind of crux of the strategic bombing campaign. This is the moment where everything changes, I think. And it's interesting going back over this material and looking at this period again, Actually, nothing's made, my mind hasn't been changed at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I still stand by that. And I think you can see it even more so now that you're kind of progressing on to kind of looking at the Strategic Air Forces following Big Week. You can see that even more. And some interesting things are going on in kind of February and March.
Yeah. Before
we get to the kind of Overlord prep proper.
Yeah.
That's really worth going into. And actually, that tipping point is A, because, as you say, they know what they need to do now. B, because they finally cracked the long-range fighter issue. But C, because the scale is now suddenly on a different level.
But this is I think more than anything else,
and scale, sorry, just one thing, is that scale means that you've got 1,000 bombers nigh on every single time you go on a raid, and similar number of fighter planes to call upon. Well, they got more like 500 at this point, half of it. But what that means is you can now smother. Yeah,
you can overwhelm.
So you can, your main target can be Oschersleben or Leipzig or whatever, but you can also do 6 subsidiary targets.
And it's always interesting in this is that
there's not enough attention on that, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, the Luftwaffe is often in the documents. It's called the GAF, isn't it? The German Air Force, which I always slightly get pulled up by.
Yes.
But the German Air Force. The Luftwaffe doesn't know which way to turn, and whichever way it turns will be answered with aggressive. Pretty much will be answered with aggressive fighter action. So they're being brought to the fight, and it's a fight they can't win. Like you say, though, the numbers here. German fighter production is also now trying to go flat out to meet the problem.
But they can't solve that problem because there's 2 parts to a fighter plane.
Yeah,
there's the plane
and there's the pilot.
Yeah. And you can have as many planes as you like, but if you haven't got the pilots to fly them, you're stuffed.
Exactly. And
that's the big win on Big Week.
Yeah. And they're being hollowed out in terms of experience.
Exactly.
The really crucial thing. It's the people 100%. Who can tell the new pilots how to fly.
Yep.
Who can tell them
the tricks of the trade.
Get up, get the sun behind you, do all those things.
Have a look at the sun properly by turning your wing.
Yeah, they're just
Zemka style.
They're not available anymore.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at Bomber Commander also. I mean, it's basically 1,000 in theory on a perfect day. It's 1,000 bombers during the day, 1,000 bombers at night, 500 fighter planes. It's
yes, and it's getting up to kind of 1,000 fighter planes.
So the ability to hammer Germany and keep it reeling.
Well, I go back to 15th of September 1940. The biggest raid of Battle of Britain Day is 100 German bombers.
Yeah, I know. And you think of the flap and some of the mythology around that. I mean,
I remember I was looking up and the sky was black with swastikas, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, exactly, try being over Leipzig in
one of the
spring of 1944.
One of the interesting things about this, though, I think is the word strategic, isn't it? Because this is the strategic bomber offensive, after all. And in the bombermen's mind, that the idea is that you're operating independent of the rest of everything else, and you are a strategy unto your strategy unto yourselves, and that you dictate that strategy, and you are the strategy.
And if you want people to do stuff for the army, create a tactical air force.
Yes, exactly.
We should do the tactical stuff.
But what happens is beginning to happen is the strategists themselves are now leaning in and going, well, actually, we need to co-opt you for our strategy and use you for the even bigger strategy that isn't your strategy.
Yes.
And yes, you're a strategic air force, but we demand you being co-opted to what we want to do.
But even before Big Week, so there is a new directive.
Yeah.
Which is issued on the 13th of February, and I love these new directives because they come thick and fast.
Yeah.
And they're always just a tweak.
Yeah.
So they're still full of the progressive destruction of blah 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 blah, the Nazi war machine, the German war machine,
dislocation, which is fantastically whatever.
Yeah. But another one is issued, and there is a sort of slight feeling from the Americans that the Brits aren't quite putting their weights on point blank targets. Albeit they're definitely putting their weight big time, and that's a fair and legitimate point because they're not. Because Harris is doing whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And on the 21st of January, General Marshall, who's the chief of the combined staff in the US, points out that only 20% of Bomber Command's bomb tonnage is expended on German fighter targets. I mean, actually, I think that's quite high for Bomber Command.
That's quite high for Bomber Command, and also given
it's gone up by 15% points during Big Week.
Well, and given that the Americans are bombing blind because of the weather, I mean, I would not get too fussy about where your bombs are landing if for points of comparison, would you? Because bad weather bombing and radar guided bombing, or whatever euphemism the Americans are using for it, some of their bombing is butt report level of
Yes.
accuracy. Isn't
Yes,
it?
that is absolutely true. But anyway, the latest directive is pretty much the same as the one of the previous year. The progressive destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial and economic systems, the disruption of vital elements of lines of communication, and the material reduction of the German air combat strength by the successful prosecution of the combined bomber offensive from all convenient bases. So, okay. But the priority remains, the first priority, is German single and twin-engine fighter airframe and component production when was bracketed with the axis-controlled ball bearing production.
So still on about the ball bearings.
Still on about ball bearings. Second priority, installations supporting the German fighter force.
Yeah.
So airfields, whatever. Third priority, crossbow targets,
Yeah,
which are starting to come in from November.
Yeah.
So crossbow targets are V1 and V2 sites.
Yeah.
And they're very difficult to hit because they're quite small and they're usually in a wood, and they've got a sort of tiny little ramp which is only about kind of 3 foot wide, if that. And so they're incredibly difficult to hit, but they're all being built in sort of Holland.
And that's coming from SHAEF, isn't it? That's coming from Eisenhower, isn't it?
absolutely, and particularly from the British leaning on
yeah,
the Americans because they know they're all pointing towards London.
Yeah, and they don't know what the V2 is even. There's considerable argument as to whether the V2 has a 10-ton warhead rather than a ton warhead. They just don't know.
No, they don't know.
And there's debate at cabinet level as to what if it's a 10-ton warhead, then we really have a problem.
Yep.
Because the destructive power is the most destructive thing anyone has come up against.
Yeah, completely. It's a massive problem. And they know about this from Peenemünde.
Yeah.
Which ironically they hit on the 17th of August.
Yeah.
Everything happens on the 17th of August. First face-to-face negotiations with the Italians to the armistice.
Yeah.
Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid.
Yeah.
And Peenemünde.
Yeah.
Anyway, so crossbow targets, that's what crossbow means, is those V1s and V2 sites. Berlin and other industrial areas, which I think is really interesting.
Well, and it's interesting, Berlin and other industrial areas. I mean, Berlin isn't an industrial target.
Well, it is a bit.
But not really.
I've been to the Heiko plant at Oranienburg.
Yeah, but it's about striking the capital. I know there are industrial sites there, but it's about the fact that Goering has said there'll be no bombers over Berlin.
Of course. But isn't it interesting that after the Battle of the Ruhr, Harris launches the Battle of Berlin in the autumn of 1943, and it's perceived to be a failure.
Yeah. Yes. Well, because it is a failure.
Yes, it's not even perceived to be a failure. It is a failure. It is a failure, and yet this is on the list. And then the other one is targets in Southeast Europe and the Balkans, which I think is interesting.
Yes.
Mutually supporting attacks by strategic forces of the United States and Britain were to be pursued with relentless determination against the same target areas of systems so far as tactical conditions allow.
I mean, imagine being a crewman and reading that. Well, we've got to pursue this with relentless determination, have we? Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks.
What do you think we're doing?
Yes, exactly. I'll get my coat.
But basically, this is the same stuff. It's sort of carry on, and here are the tweaks. And
well, I think the crossbow ones is quite interesting. They're difficult targets because they're so small, but actually they fit in very well into the CBO, the Combined Bomber Offensive, and also within the wider point blank plan, I think, because they're a hop and a skip across the channel.
Yeah.
They're, inverted commas, a milk run.
Yeah.
And you can do them on dodgy days when...
Yes.
You know,
easier to find and all that.
Easier
although
to find,
they're small,
you know,
the French coast is easy to find.
You know, so
in
there's
a
a
way
big
that
bank
Essen
of,
isn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a big bank of cloud over kind of sort of southern Reich. Then okay, well we'll just go and do some crossbows.
Yeah.
And you're still sort of ticking that box.
Yeah. And I mean, everything's putting the Luftwaffe under strain. Everything.
Yeah.
If you have drawn the Luftwaffe fighter effort to the Reich, you can attack the point blank targets far more easily.
Yeah.
So whatever whichever lever, the main lever, which is to attack Germany itself, has been pulled, and that's drawn the Luftwaffe away, and then it's being attrited in Germany, so it can't defend these sites.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the swings and the roundabouts actually working in the Americans' favour in this instance.
Yeah, although the other problem they've got is that the 15th Air Force, which was seen as so vital for the reason for going into the Italian campaign in the first place, the main reason was to get those airfields at Foggia.
Oh, it's killing me.
Upgraded from 6 bomb groups to 21 bomb groups by March 1944. Well, here we are at the beginning of March 1944, and temporarily, but still at a crucial moment in the air war, those bomb groups have been handed over to the ground forces, support the ground forces.
Yeah.
So this is sort of smashing of monasteries and bridges, and hitting Turin and the Brenner Pass. And
although the attacks on bridges then feed into the thinking that pans out in Northwest Europe anyway.
Yeah.
What should you strike?
Yeah. Yes, that's the thorny issue which we will get onto. But first of all, we should talk about Berlin. And I think it's interesting because we talked about my mate Larry Goldstein in Worrywart when we were doing Big Week.
Yeah.
Here he is. His 25th mission is Berlin for the first time. I mean, imagine you pulled that straw.
You'd think, oh God, what have I got? What's a guy got to do around here?
Exactly. So his diary's really good. And do you want to read this one?
Well, and they're going for ball bearings, but it's actually to draw German fighters into the sky, and it's also the symbolism of Berlin is so important and powerful. Just after bombs away, an enemy fighter hits us with a 20mm cannon burst, narrowly missing me in the radio room. Bomb bay doors refused to close, so had to be cranked up by hand. This was only half accomplished. Returned to field, and upon landing found there were no brakes. BJ handled the ship like an expert, taking us off the runway, through a fence, and finally to a stop. Nobody hurt or even shaken up. Ship was well sprayed with holes from the one burst. Hole in radio room was awful close, but that was all. At last, I have walked away from the plane on my 25th mission unscathed. Thank God!
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
I mean, that whole day for him couldn't have gone worse until the moment that he actually gets out of the plane.
Jesus Christ!
First of all, you got to get to Berlin.
Yeah.
Then you do get hit. Then you can't crank up the get the undercarriage down.
Yeah.
Then the brakes have gone. At every single turn, you're thinking, this is my last moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
I mean, obviously, the fates deciding to give him a pass there. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
He was such a laugh. He was such a good bloke.
Was he?
Yeah, he was a really good bloke.
Cool. Well, it's great that he's in this account. But the thing is, though, they don't get to Berlin, do they?
Not really.
I mean,
only one of 14 combat wings.
It's a long way away. That's a long way to go.
Yep.
The weather's bad. There's 14 combat wings, and only one of them gets there.
Yeah.
It's not.
Second one's a bit better.
Yeah. I mean, it's
That's 2 days later, 6th of March.
Yeah. And yes, and they
and this, incidentally, is the first time that the 4th Fighter Group are in Mustangs.
Right.
Over,
right
on long range duties.
Right.
So Don Blakesley and co. They're all off and they're loving it.
And this is actually Gainshagen, which is south of Berlin, isn't it? So, if you're Nazi government, you're looking up and thinking, oh, crap.
660 bombers, 4-engine bombers. That's a lot of bombers.
Yeah. And
it sure beats your 100 twin engine over London.
And fighters. I mean, although, you say 600 bombers, 660 bombers, 69 aircraft lost, so 10% loss rate.
But it's not 20.
Yeah. Yes.
And suddenly the production line is churning at a rate that it wasn't.
Yeah.
In 1943,
and then on the 8th of March, a third raid with
this is absolutely amazing.
1,015 fighters in support.
It's just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
they only lose 17, but shoot down 87 enemy aircraft.
Yeah,
I mean those are big hits.
And Goering, do you want to do Goering?
Yeah,
it's not Goering, is it? It's the American official history, but basically,
no, I'm going to say this. Shall I do it? No, I can't do it. I wanted to do it in German.
It's not. It's the U.S. official history is the site of compact and orderly formations of American heavy bombers flying in clear sky over the city could not but have made a deep impression on the Berliners. We have Goering's word that the appearance of American long-range fighters over Berlin was even more disturbing to the military. So Goering,
Gott in Himmel!
Exactly.
Where are these fighters coming from?
It is impossible. He's got the Fuhrer on the phone going, "You told me Berlin was safe!"
So you're still at the stage, aren't you, with Daisy, where you're reading her stories and stuff?
Yeah.
So I did that with my Daisy for quite a long time, and towards the end of that period of my life, she'd say, "Read it in German."
Really?
So I'd have to do the whole night of reading.
Really? Well,
and then Danny went to the forest and started to lace the pheasants. It's really funny.
Danny's a champion of the world.
Yeah, Danny is the champion of the entire Welt. It's really funny.
Well, we're doing the Greek myths at the moment.
And then, really, well, because the other day she said to me, she said, you used to read me, and she said, I never used to really listen. I just used to like kind of going to sleep with you, kind of talking at me.
Yeah, they don't listen.
And so I'd say, and you remember last night. Danny was kind of in the woods and just driven with his wooden blocks. Or
so
whatever.
you could have sat there and given a tales of the point blank offensive.
Well, I'm slightly feeling it was a missed opportunity. Anyway, back to the
so they
Eighth
go
Air
back
Force.
to Berlin. I mean, this is interesting because this is only a month after Big Week, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
No, it's not even that. It's like a week, 10 days.
Yeah, yeah. So the sheer turnover in bomber crews and replacements.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's just those production lines.
Yeah.
They've got to kind of go, they start slow and then they sort of, it's like a train, like an old steam train pulling out of a station.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Once they built up the momentum, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's $250,000 for a B-17. Which
it's
is
so much money, isn't it?
kind of which is sort of I think kind of 2.6 million now. So they're not. I mean, they're
a
not
lot
as
cheaper than F-35.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say that they're a lot cheaper than F-35. But that is a lot of money because how many built? 26,000, something like that.
Yep.
Maybe someone in the booth could get a calculator out and work out what 26,000 times $250,000 is. They're spending a lot of money just on the airframes.
Just on bombers. Before you
Just
get
on
to
the
everything
bombers.
else.
Before you get to everything else.
Right.
But so they cost $250,000 each. They make 26,000. So that's like apparently that's sort of $6.5 billion.
Okay.
Spent on airframes.
Yep. So that gets you. Doesn't get you out of St Pancras, does it? On the HST. I think I'd rather the bombers.
I'd sooner fly to Manchester in a B-17.
So would I.
You could, I mean, basically,
That's what we should do.
basically,
just have a fleet of
26,000
B-17s.
B-17s.
Just forget the rail service.
Bagsy the ball turret. It's an awful lot of money. What a crewman costs to train.
Yep. 50 men on the ground to get 10 in the air.
Yeah. I mean, this is
a lot.
extremely expensive, isn't it? And yet it's paying off.
Yep.
And it's basically become a juggernaut, isn't it? So
Completely.
Yeah.
So final trip to Berlin that month is on the 22nd of March. But, bad weather is still hounding it. It is March after all.
Yeah.
In bad winters in the war.
Yeah.
And so, they're not kind of hammering the enemy in the way that they want to, despite these numbers. Having said that, if you've got 1,000 bombers over, and even if only 800 get to the target or 600 get to the target, it's still a hell of a lot of an ordnance being dropped.
Yeah.
And they still do manage to fly 23 days in March out of 30, which is
That's absolutely incredible.
of which some of those are obviously crossbow targets, but even so, that's quite a lot. But the interesting thing is now at the end of March, the formal role of the CBO, the Combined Bomber Offensive, ends. And this is the point that you were talking about earlier on. The Strategic Air Forces now get handed over to the Strategic Overall Forces, which is Eisenhower and Schaeff.
Yeah.
Because on the 1st of April, Eisenhower takes over direct control of the Strategic Air Forces.
Yeah.
So this is Spots, this is Harris. He's now got control over where those air forces go, and incidentally also the tactical air forces.
Yes. And effectively is the most powerful man on earth at that point.
Yeah, he is.
Because of the forces he has at his disposal.
Completely.
Right, so join us after the break. We'll look at the crews, and then we'll look at what Overlord has in store for the bomber offensive.
Yep.
TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with our 8th Air Force series. This is this episode?
Episode 6, Summer of 44.
Summer of 44.
Although we started in the spring.
Yes. Well, the last raids we talked about were the raids.
Maybe we should just call it Overlord this week.
I think it is called Overlord because it's your tyranny of Overlord stuff here.
Yep.
And obviously that last raid was on the 22nd of March, so we're past the equinox now. So so the days are getting longer.
Yep.
In theory, the weather's improving, but it's still massively changeable, which is because that's the normal weather, as we pointed out a few episodes ago. That's the normal weather in Europe. It's American weather that's unusual with clear skies.
Yes, exactly.
So let's look at the crews. We started this episode with Bert Stiles,
I thought it'd be interesting to look at him because he's, he does write this brilliant book. And if anyone hasn't read Serenade to the Big Bird, I just literally couldn't recommend it more highly. It's such a fantastic book. It is in print just about as a sort of crappy kind of print on demand kind of version you can get on Amazon. Yeah. But it is just fantastic. It's absolutely beautifully written. And he's just a very interesting figure all round because he comes from Denver, Colorado. He's the son of an electrician and a music teacher. He's obviously really, really bright. And he's also ambitious, and his ambitions are to write. Yeah. Goes to Colorado College and he writes for the campus newspaper, which is known as the Tiger. He's quite political. He's pacifist. He's that sort of classic kind of bookish, good-looking young man who's kind of, wants to change the world, slightly idealistic, all those sort of things. He writes a number of short stories in 1941 and sends them off to various literary agents in New York and gets a nibble of interest from the agents, husband and wife agents, Ruth and Max Ailey. And so he hitchhikes to New York, and they hire him as a hand on their farm in Connecticut. Right. And say, look, come and work on a farm. We'll give you board and lodging, and we'll give you some, the benefits of our literary wisdom. Right. And he goes, it's a deal. So he goes there and gets his first story published in Saturday Evening Post and writes for various, like Atlantic magazine and various others. But obviously it's wartime, and he's a young man. He's come of age. And he enlists rather than waiting for his draft. So that
even though he's a pacifist, he's idealistic enough to go and...
Yes, because he feels very, very strongly that Hitler and Nazism is a wrong that needs to be stamped on. And also, you might be a pacifist at 18, but you kind of, change your mind a bit. Yeah. So he wins his wings, flying B-70s, and gets sent to England as a replacement pilot in March 1944. And there he joins the 401st Bomb Squadron, which is part of the 91st Bomb Group, one of the smaller bomb groups. Yeah. Not 100. Yeah. Yes. At Bassington. And he's a second pilot, not a first pilot. And this, I've never really got to the bottom of how you get chosen as a first pilot or second pilot. I guess it's just your kind of report on your wings and stuff like that. And if you're kind of, if you're excellent, you get...
How do the RAF do it?
We only have one, don't you?
Yeah, well, you have pilot, flight engineer. They're saving on people.
Yeah. Yeah, don't have two pilots.
Yeah.
So, but weirdly, he's second pilot to Lieutenant Sam Newton, who he had been friends with at Colorado College. Just by total fluke.
That's fortunate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're old friends, and they're on a B-17 called Time's A-Wasting. They do a practice mission on the 18th of April, and then the first mission on the 19th of April, which is to Kassel, which is a decent stretch. That's beyond the dams.
Yes, it's the other side of the dams, isn't it? Yeah.
And he's doing a lot of missions to France at this stage because this is point blank stuff. So they're hitting marshalling yards in Rouen and Reims and a few in the Ruhr and this kind of stuff. And it's interesting reading the book because you suddenly see where kind of I remember there's a line where the navigator says to the bombardier, I think he's played by who's that guy who's also in Titanic.
Oh, the villain in Titanic.
Yeah, the villain in Titanic, but he's a good guy. He's a kind of sort of medical student in Memphis Belle. And he goes, "Are you scared?" He goes, "No, I'm Val." Yeah. And Bert Stiles says to Sam on his first mission, "Are you scared?" He goes, "No, I'm Sam." Yeah. So it's kind of lifted. But on the 7th of May, they go to Berlin. Right. So they go back to Berlin on the 7th of May. So they are still doing, even though they're supposed to be doing just purely kind of supporting of Overlord stuff.
Well, we did say earlier on that a lot of this is subject to interpretation. And
because of the Heinkel factory at Oranienburg, you can kind of, a ball bearing.
Well, and you're taking on the GAF.
You're taking on the GAF. So literally every mission is a point blank mission.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things about Stiles' memoirs, it's written contemporaneously. It's written in... Most of it is he's obviously making notes in between the missions and jotting stuff down, and then he compiles the book. It's quite a slight book. It's not a big book. He writes it in July and August 1944. Yeah, after he's ended his first tour, before he starts his second one, and there's it's really good about life on the base, the relationships with people getting on each other's nerves. Right. Him and Sam actually kind of rub each other up the wrong way.
Right. Even though they're old pals. He finds his kind of, Sam Newton has a kind of sort of sang-froid and kind of diffidence that he finds quite impenetrable. Right. And he finds it quite frustrating. Yeah. Sort of times in London where he's sort of trying to get girls and gets a bit lonely and, so there's a lot of
this is absolutely horrendous. What on earth is going on, and why is the world gone so mad? There's quite a lot of that.
Yeah.
But he's also incredibly vivid about the violence. He doesn't shirk it at all. And I think we should do this bit because it is really, you know, I don't think anyone should be in any doubt about just how brutal it could be. We've done a lot of sort of planes disappearing in flames and all the rest of it, but it's worth kind of spelling it out a bit sometimes, I think.
Well, the thing is the violence aside, being in those planes is an incredibly hostile environment, isn't it?
It really, really is.
The whole thing's dangerous in itself. You know, if you accidentally unplug your oxygen, you're a goner. You know, it's so cold that if you take your gloves off, your flesh will come off on the guns or the instruments when you touch them. Everything about the environment is hostile, even before you get to the fact you
yes,
know.
and it's worth spelling out that if you're a waste gunner, there's a massive hole in the side of the plane.
Yeah, with the
and,
weather
and you're
blowing
at 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
And you know, they have these electric warmed suits which are always short circuiting.
Yeah.
And always giving them electric shocks or not working down the leg, but boiling on the
well,
chest.
And it's easy to break the circuit cable. You know, if you're too strenuous in it, you might break and end up with no heat in your legs. You might not be plugged in. I mean, there's tail gunners, aren't there, who are discovered dead because their oxygen's come out and they're frozen to death. Or
asphyxiated.
All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's incredibly. So it's a really, really hostile environment, and you've got men with terrible ear problems from flying at altitude and coming back down, and
also just going deaf because of the noise.
Deaf because of the noise, and all these sort of the physical strictures of flying at altitude.
I think the thing about these bombers, and you know, if anyone's ever lucky enough to sort of step inside a B-17 or a Lancaster, the overwhelming sensation you have is on the ground they look huge.
Yeah.
When you're in them, they look tiny.
Yes.
They're incredibly cramped. They are tin cans. The
fragility.
The fragility.
And
what
shocking.
you've got is you've got this situation where technology has advanced exponentially over the previous 20 years so that you can create something as sophisticated as a flying fortress. But what they're designed to do is get you to a certain target and drop a bomb as accurate as technology will allow for the period. But they haven't caught up with man's ability to actually man these things effectively.
Yes, yeah.
And they're just not very effectively manned. Yeah. What isn't in doubt is the skill of the pilots, the skills of the crews, the just barefaced courage of these guys getting up into a plane every single time that they're going on a mission. But what they haven't worked out is, you know,
the environment.
The environment. These are not pressurised cabins. That's on the way with the B-29, but it isn't at this point. It's absolutely brutal, and they're pushing what a young man can do to the absolute
to
edge.
the complete limit. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that the pressurised cockpit, when it comes, means that you can fly in shirt sleeves and all this sort of thing, and everything's rosy. But before that, and it is this idea, isn't it? The bomber can fly high and fast to get away from the fighter, and the crew are the spam in the can. No one's giving it any proper thought.
Yeah. And just try getting into a tail gun.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare because
obviously
the
ball
tail
turret
tapers
is even worse.
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. I mean, I haven't tried that, but I have sat in the tail gunner's position, and you've got to get over yet another spar. You've got to. It obviously tapers, so it's incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
It's so cramped. It's not true.
Yeah.
You feel so vulnerable. There's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably
No,
grim.
it's horrendous, isn't it? But that's before we factor in the violence. So
So this one incident that Stiles writes about is actually he's not on flying roster that day, and basically the crews tend to do was if they weren't flying when the raids return, they all come out and watch and count who's in and who's out and all the rest of it. And one badly bashed about Fort comes in. Actually, it's not that badly bashed about, but there's trouble, and he and the crew get off very kind of dazed, and Stiles happens to be there and goes to offer his help. And if anyone's a bit squeamish, I'd just switch off for the next 3 minutes. So the waist gunner's been killed, and basically the chunk of the top of his head from the top of his nose has just been completely ripped off.
Yeah,
and Stiles goes, part of his brain sprayed around as far forward as the door into the radio room. The rest of them spilled out when the body crumpled. And a second bit of flak from the same burst. So basically this burst of flak has just gone boom, like that. But he's got body armour. Yeah. So the body bit of him is okay. The top of his head isn't, and his legs aren't. And they've just been ripped off.
Yeah.
And not a single other person in the ship is hurt.
Not even the waist gunner next to him.
He's just taken the full blast of this bit. So there's a massive chunks of torn aluminum out the side of the plane, and this guy's just had the misfortune to take it kind of face on, really, literally. So Stiles clambers in to help the medic, so the crew don't have to. They don't have to kind of deal with the trauma. It's bad enough seeing him there, but don't want to have to sort of get him off. And as he pulls up, his hand goes straight onto a glob of brains, and he takes one look at the body and then clambers out again. And for a while afterwards, he just sits on the grass, not feeling horrified, but feeling a kind of profound sense of shock.
Yeah.
And he writes, all the forts got back. Nobody else was hurt. One man ran through his luck and got it. I didn't know the guy. The face with nothing above the nose was too horrible to remember. The body could have come from anywhere, Seattle or Wichita or the Valley of the Three Forks of the Wolf. And so he sits there and looks up at this beautifully peaceful English summer sky. The sun is out. It's gorgeous as spring in the air or whatever. Well, it's summer by this point. The wind sort of soft on the grass. And he writes, one man gone, 1 million more to go. Maybe even 1 billion before this is over. Maybe everyone in the world will get it this time. There are shells enough to go around. If some efficiency expert could just figure out a way, there would never have to be another war. We could wipe out the human race this time. The senselessness of it, and the ugliness of it, drove away all other thought for a time, when the despair went away, leaving only doubt and a deep sadness. In a steady, endless procession, wars have swept the world, eaten away at its heart, growing from stupid little brawls with clubs and rocks to the mechanical perfection of a city flattened out in the night. So many bombs to the acre, so many planes for the job. Fill up the bomb bays and send them over. Send in the ground troops to bayonet the ones who are only stunned.
Bloody hell.
Yes. It's quite hard-hitting stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, like all of these people's experience, it's not kind of gloom and despair the whole of the time. There's plenty of larks and black humour and funny moments as well. But you know, here's an intelligent, thoughtful, well-read young man trying to analyse the total bonkersness of clambering into this metal tin and flying at altitude in freezing conditions into scenes of unspeakable violence to drop bombs
through clouds on God knows what.
I mean, you know, when you put it like that, it also seems a little crazy.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think it's worth just mentioning at this point that the 25 mission.
Well, yes,
that comes to an end, and that there was never kind of any hard and fast rule about this. This was just each theatre has its own different rules, which of course is a catch-22.
Which is the purest catch-22 thing. That it's meant to originally kind of be a year, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then it's settled on 25. Then no one's making 25, or a handful of people make 25 missions, and then they put it up.
Well, they put it up in the spring because they're starting to do these crossbow.
Yeah.
Things which are kind of hopping and skipping these little milk runs in between, but that's a combat
but
mission.
I mean, if you're a crewman, you're like, I've done my 25. I don't care if they're only over the channel.
Well, you know, it's yes. And what I'm not sure is whether they're kind of, you know, you get to 24 and then they up it, or whether kind of if you start on 25, you finish on 25. I haven't got to the bottom of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so 1st of April it's increased to 30 missions. On the 6th of June, D-Day, it gets increased again to 35 missions.
And that's just because.
But losses are going down.
But that's losses are going down. But it's also
you're more likely to get through 35 divisions than you are 25.
But that's a tempo thing that you can't be laying off crews at this point. Experienced crews.
Well, also because they're flying so often as well, and it's summer, so you can fly more in summer.
Yeah. So it's a sheer tempo to go with Overlord. So Overlord, the prelude to Overlord at the top level is endless arguments about who's in charge of what,
who's in charge, and what their
scope is, and what they should be, and what they're doing, and all that sort of stuff. So we're back to the old sort of arm wrestling with Harrison Spots and
Tedder now, because Tedder's now out of the.
Oh God!
I mean, don't forget, Spots and Tedder are mates.
Yeah.
So this is purely professional debate rather than. I hate you guts, you lie me.
And there are boffins involved. So Solly Zuckerman,
yes, indeed,
who is a British anatomist, zoologist and anatomist, who at the start of the war sort of gets drawn into the question of what does bombing do, how are people killed, what do weapons do to people, and who looks at cadavers from France. He looks at people injured and killed in the Blitz in London. He sets up a place in Stewartby near Bedford, in a brickworks in Stewartby, Bedford, where basically he's blowing up rabbits and birds and stuff, because the anatomy of birds is telling him an awful lot about what shockwaves from bombs do, what tiny particles do. The people on, he has a team of doctors and zoologists with him, but he starts number crunching and he starts thinking. He comes away basically from the fatality thing, because in the end he says you can't draw any conclusions. It's all too impossible to actually say what kills people. But what we have to do is use air power, and he's a real believer in air power over land power. He's a complete convert from looking at the Blitz, which I think.
Well,
is really
he's also
interesting.
behind the bombing of Pantelleria.
Well, this is the point.
And Spots and him are really, really tight.
Yeah, he goes to North Africa and he gets involved in what you can do with air power, and his brains are picked by all sorts of people.
Not least Spots.
Yeah, exactly. So Pantelleria is this offensive using only air power in the Mediterranean, which is actually effective. And then he then talks about how what you need to do is attack bridges and attack, basically, transport nodal points in Italy. Harris calls him the so-called expert.
Yeah.
Harris cannot stand him.
No.
But what you've got is this the idea of this transportation plan. That what you do is strike at German transport. You strike marshalling yards. You strike at basically Germany's ability to move people around. And do you do that close to the potential battlefield, or do you do that further back? And that's the transportation plan argument, and its argument with itself,
which is incredibly sensible, because it's based on I mean, there's two things here. First of all, most of their fuel is synthetic fuel, which is made using coal.
Yeah.
And coal moves from A to B by rail. So if you can stop that, then you can't make any synthetic fuel. You don't need to hit the synthetic fuel base, because you've gummed it up. But the other thing is, of course, is that the whole, the glue of the Wehrmacht is the Reichsbahn, and if you can dismantle that, it's like an Airfix model where all the glue has suddenly kind of fallen to pieces and the whole thing just collapses. You know, it won't work. So there's good sense of it, but at the same time, Spots is arguing.
At the same time, So this is the point: is that there's other opinion too.
Yeah,
and that's oil. So Spots' oil plan.
Yes, and he's got some scientists as well, not least Zuckerman, who he's still really, really tight with.
Yeah.
And he reckons that he can by targeting all these oil plants, whether it be Ploesti or whether it be these synthetic fuel plants in every refinery that the Germans have, you can account for 80% of production and 60% of refining capacity, and that's the end of them. Yeah. And that's fine, but the flaw in that one is that that's all going to take time. That's not something where you can have immediate results. You hit a bridge and the bridge goes down, you've hit it, and you can do that by next Tuesday. Yeah. Whereas this is a much more kind of sort of esoteric target. I suppose.
I mean, it's back to ball bearings. It's back to
ball bearings.
Where can we find what is the thing where we can. What's the German funny bone, and how do we best hit it?
But the interesting thing about this is actually that historians have made big play about these debates over the transportation plan and the oil plan. The reality is that actually they run concurrently, and they can run concurrently. And the so-called argument between Tedder and Spots is not really one at all.
Yeah.
It's about emphasis.
Yeah.
And actually, the solution is one that Spots is pretty happy with.
Yeah.
So it's a completely false argument, and the idea that you can only have one type of target is absolutely nonsense, because
if you've got 1,000 bombers to put
we already know that they're not doing that.
Yeah. I think a sort of centre of, if you're constructing the story that it's everyone all disagreeing with each other, you could always resort to Harris to have some memo where he scribbled in the margin says who, or not bloody likely or whatever, and there you go, Harris. You can go back to Harris and say he disagrees, but Harris actually, if he's ordered to do something, does it. So actually, he's not that big a sort of fly in this.
No, he's not really, and he does, and they do spot it. I mean, the point is that Harris keeps saying the most efficient use of bombers is to just area bomb.
Yeah.
But his bomber force then keeps continually, as 1944 progresses, disproving this theory by becoming incredibly accurate, and not the 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, who by this point are becoming, under Leonard Cheshire, are becoming precision bombers par excellence. I mean, they're supremely good at it, and their way of doing it is sending in mozzies at very low level, very fast,
marking
targets very accurately, and then everyone goes
and eventually Mustangs. Yeah. So there's a bombing policy conference on the 25th of March.
That's right.
And the notable thing is that Eisenhower's chairing that.
And he's absolutely had it up to here with all the discussions and twos and fro's and kind of Harris, Spots, Tedder, everyone having their two penneth, Arnold picking in.
Yeah.
And actually, he says, if you don't do this, I might actually resign. I can't be dealing with it. He has an off-record resignation threat.
Fantastic.
Sometimes you just have to pull that particular card, and obviously it works.
Yeah. Well, and also, again, we're back to these people who they have the luxury of being able to argue about this, don't they? They're not under, in a strange way, they're not under the sort of pressure. If you're the Luftwaffe, you're thinking, Jesus, how do we deal with all these threats coming all at once? The fact is that the bomber force is now so powerful. You can pick and choose. You can decide. You know, in that sense, it is now a truly strategic weapon, isn't it? In the way that it wasn't the year before.
Yep.
It really has the
the
possibility of strategic intervention in a way that, I mean, you think of Schweinfurt-Regensburg, which is what? Not even 6 months ago. Schweinfurt 2 is not even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Sheer transformation.
It's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
But one of the what absolutely comes clear out of all these debates in March 1944 about the form that the strategic campaign should have in the run up to Overlord is a lot of it is to do with Lee Mallory, my favourite person, who is, for those who can't remember, was 12 Group Commander in Chief during the Battle of Britain. Later got bumped up to be 11 Group Commander, which was Park's old one in Southeast England, and then later took over command of Fighter Command itself. And he never went to the Mediterranean. He was never hanging out with where all the kind of real action was at, with all the kind of top notch airmen that were developing in the Mediterranean, the Quesada, Doolittle, Brereton, all these guys, and Cunningham and so on. So he's out of that loop. He's not considered to be a team player. He's quite sort of, he can be quite truculent, but he can also be...
fail to develop a strategy as well.
But also he's just sort of, a bit sort of personality bypass. Yeah. And the problem is that because he's been in situ in 1943 in the UK, he is put in charge of all the air forces for the invasion. And the concern by Spots, and frankly, pretty much everybody, is that Lee Mallory will be the guy in charge. In the same way that Monty is in charge of is Commander-in-Chief of the ground forces, Ramsey is in charge of the naval forces, Lee Mallory is in charge of the air forces, and Spots just doesn't want this guy, who's completely talentless, to be in charge. And that's what this is really about. And I mean, what's interesting with Lee Mallory is he just gets more and more sidelined as I mean, Conyngham can't bear him and basically kind of kicks him to one side. Yeah. And they just do their own thing. And one of the things that's kind of sorted out in the 25th of March conference is that transportation plan is going to take the priority. But the oil plan will come in when the opportunity arises. Yeah. And increasingly so. Yeah. And so I mean, Spots is happy with that. But
again, it's one of those faintly vague bombing directives that leaves everyone wiggle room.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is you couldn't be too prescriptive because, as you said a moment ago, you can't have one target. You're 1,000 bomber force, and how you're doing things is by sending some of it one place, some of it another place. You've got to come up with the targets, haven't you?
Yeah. On the 19th of April, Eisenhower gives greater priority to crossbow because they can see that this is being accelerated. Yeah. They're about to do the invasion. What they don't want to be doing is these new wonder weapons, secret weapons, kind of being directed towards the invasion fleet.
Well, which as it happens doesn't happen.
But it might do.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You don't know that in April.
Take that extremely seriously, yeah.
So these sites are repeatedly pummeled.
Yeah. And all this time, Bomber Commander showing that actually they can bomb accurately, and Harris is not. I suppose it is a lack of faith in what his crews can do. Is they're hitting marshalling yards. They're doing what they have to do in terms of transportation plan, and it's incredibly effective. I mean, it's the thing that means in the end, because a big part of German decision making is where do you place your armour in the event of an invasion, and if the railway transportation is being hammered, that reduces your options. Yeah. So you've got to have to bet on Pas-de-Calais or Normandy or the Eastern Front. The bet you make is a harder bet to make because you're not going to be able to change your mind.
Yeah. The other thing that's I think is really worth pointing out is that the strategic air forces are not doing the transportation plan in isolation. Yeah. There is also the 9th Air Force, which is a tactical air force. So that is the sister air force of the 8th, commanded by Pete Quesada, who's just totally brilliant, absolute legend. And they're full of medium bombers. So these are twin-engine bombers, which operate much lower levels, much more accurately. These are the guys that are kind of smashing your bridges over the Seine. Yeah. Whereas the strategic bombers are hitting big marshalling yards at Ham or Dusseldorf or Rouen or Reims or wherever it might be. Yeah. And you've got the 2nd Tactical Air Force as well, which is the RAF Duke forces and other...
Tons of Typhoons.
So Typhoons, which are part of 2nd TAF, 2nd Tactical Air Force, under Cunningham, they destroy 78 out of 92 radar stations along the Atlantic coast in France.
Bloody hell. I mean, France is copying it at this stage.
It's copying it big time. And now you've got the situation where, you know, the Germans are finally starting to crumble about this. And it's really important that one doesn't just think it's the 8th Air Force going over every single day.
Yeah.
So the 8th Air Force is now doing kind of much deeper penetrations and also these crossbow targets. But 9th Air Force is also doing crossbow targets and bridges on the Loire and Seine and all the rest of it. And the Germans are just being swamped. And the general in charge of all fighter forces, which is Adolf Galland, who, even though he's only 32 at this point, on the 21st of April, he warns Milch and Goering that his fighters are being completely swamped by the vast number of Allied fighters. This is like Malta in April 1942 in reverse.
Yeah.
And Allied fighters by this point haven't just gained superiority, but supremacy.
Yes.
Do you want to do the Galland
accent? Oh, why not? Well, why not?
I think this opportunity to show
well,
off German.
I think I ought to, really, oughtn't I? I think Galland, obviously, he is 32, but he's quite clearly an able suck-up, isn't he? I mean, you don't get this job by just talent, do you? You're good at going hunting with Goering and kissing, slapping thighs, and saying, yes, that pink uniform looks brilliant, or whatever.
The
ratio in which we fight today is about 1 to 7. The standard of the Americans is extraordinarily high. During each enemy raid, we lose about 50 fighters. Things have gone so far that the danger of a collapse of our arm exists.
There you go.
Yeah. So that's
a wake-up call.
I mean, it's thousands of sorties a day, basically, they're facing, isn't it?
Yeah. Because if 8th Air Force alone could put out 1,000 fighters, then you add on 2nd TAF, then you add on, you know, you've got 1,500, 1,600 fighter planes swarming over Northwest Europe every single day. That's a huge, huge number.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, the radar stations have all been destroyed, so you don't know where they are. So vectoring people to deal with them is much more difficult.
And one of the reasons why these airfields are going back is because part of that Doolittle directive in January 1944 is that when you've done your raid, you then go down and headshot and you shoot up any fighter bases you can.
Attack targets of opportunity. Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, as the pre-invasion air plan continues, they then launched little mini operations within the bigger operations. And on the 22nd of May, 9th Air Force and 2nd TAF and 8th Fighter Command launched Chattanooga Choo Choo, which some wag has codenamed. And this is a coordinated blitz on the Reichsbahn.
Yeah.
So what they say is, right, chaps, when you go over to Europe, and every time you see a railway line, shoot it up.
Yeah.
Every time you see a locomotive, shoot it up. Just shoot up absolutely everything, and it's an absolute hammering. And one of the guys that I've followed over the years is Gabi Gabreski, who's a kind of sort of first generation. His parents were immigrants from Poland, came over, lived in Coal City, I remember, in Pennsylvania.
God.
They were miners, obviously.
Yeah.
Anyway, he joins the Air Force. And interestingly, he nearly gets washed out in training. He just can't land.
Right.
He's really, really bad at landing.
Yes, that's a key component.
And he gets his kind of sort of, right, this is your final chance, and makes it. He's in Hawaii when Pearl Harbor happens, and goes over and joins gets their transfer to the RCAF.
Yeah.
Flies in the Eagle Squadrons, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
By this point, he's one of the leading aces in the 8th Fighter Command. And he's one of the squadron commanders, 61st Fighter Squadron in Zemke's Wolfpack, the 56th Fighter Group, still with Thunderbolts, by the way. And they're on the 22nd of May, first of all, before they do Chattanooga Choo Choo, they're escorting 300 heavies to bombers to attack Kiel.
Yep.
Do that. And then they do a thing which is called Zemke's Fan. So on the way back, they work out that one squadron, the 61st will go and do one area.
Yeah.
62nd will go and do another area, and they'll just sweep everything for any kind of, and the 63rd will do another.
I mean, just how are you German and not know you've lost?
Yeah. So you basically these guys are just marauding.
Yeah.
And they're doing the 61st are doing the kind of Bremen area on the way back.
Yeah.
And Gabreski spots a badly camouflaged fighter airfield, and as they approach, they see the Focke-Wulfs down below, thinking, "Oh, yikes!"
Yeah, scramble.
Again, this is a reverse of 1940.
Yeah.
Luftwaffe marauding over Army of the Air airfields in France, for example.
But with the numbers to do it.
And the firepower. So 16 Focke-Wulfs frantically take off, and basically they just shoot the whole lot down. They shoot down 13 of them.
God.
Just bam, one after the other. Advantage of speed, height, experience, skill.
Yeah.
50 caliber machine guns.
Yeah.
And you know, that day they also kind of destroy six locomotives, 7 damaged, 18 river barges. Yeah. And the really key moment where they know that they've done what they need to do in time for D-Day comes on Sunday the 28th of May, and this is a massive moment, because on that day 858 Air Force bombers hit oil targets, and this is again just proving the point that it's not just transportation targets near Magdeburg and Leuna in East Germany. So Magdeburg is about 40 miles west of Berlin. 697 fighters are dispatched to on this day, and it's a really big moment because for the loss of 8 fighter command aircraft, they shoot down and damage 78 enemy planes. And what they've realised is that every aircraft shot up on the ground in that last week leading up to the 28th, so from Chattanooga Choo Choo onwards, has been at least 500 miles from Normandy.
Blimey.
And that is the big moment. So basically, it's absolutely the relentless fighting them in the air and on the ground. It's the marauding on the ground. Yeah. So suddenly these airfields are no longer safe. Yeah. And because the radar, as you say, because the radar stations have been knocked out, they're being bounced. They're bounced.
So between January and June, German aircraft losses on all fronts are 137% of established strength. 6,259 lost in combat.
Yep.
3,608 lost in accidents.
I know, it's amazing.
Due to bad weather.
Bad weather and ill training.
They fight despite, and here's an interesting thing. One of the things about the Battle of Britain that often gets talked about is the home advantage that's a force multiplier for the RAF. The pilot's shot down, bails out, he's in a hurricane for breakfast the following morning.
Yeah.
The Germans are not able to pull that advantage in. And even though most of the fight is going on over Germany, they lose 2,262 pilots in that time.
That's amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it? In June, their losses are 3,534 aircraft, which is...
in June?
Just in June, which is 100 less, basically, or 90 less than the 3,626 aircraft they produce. So even though...
They're treading water.
Even though... that's incredible. Under the strain that German industry is under, they still manage to produce 3,500 fighters. But the problem is they're losing that many as well. So they can't even tread... They basically can't tread water.
No.
And that combination of aircraft attrition and manpower attrition means they're done.
But if you go back to the kind of early episodes in this series and you think about that incredible jeopardy there was for the whole of Overlord, this urgency to clear the skies, and how in the balance it was, and the crisis of morale in the autumn of 1943, the kind of where the hell are we going to get enough long range fighters from, the kind of the slaughter of Schweinfurt and Schweinfurt 2, and all the problems that they had and the angst they're having even in January 1944, when Spots is turning to Doolittle going, if you haven't got the guts to the job, I'll find someone who has, all this kind of stuff. By the 28th of May, they've pulled it off.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that there's so many episodes in the Second World War where in the narrative, we just take it for granted. It's taken for granted that the invasion force will get across and that the minesweepers will sweep the minefields out to sea before they land. Yeah. It's taken for granted that air power comes in and kicks ass, and they're all going to land on Omaha Beach and Golden Sword and Juneau and Utah and all the rest of it, absolutely without any issue. And the air battle in the 6 months, in the no more than that, in the kind of year before D-Day is launched, is so full of twists and turns and peaks and troughs, the proverbial roller coaster. It's absolutely incredible. And I always find it just amazing that they pulled it off by the 28th of May 1944, which after all is just a week before D-Day.
A week before D-Day, yeah. But the Germans are sort of they're kind of fighting the Battle of Britain in reverse. But against,
not very well.
But not very well. But against an air force that knows what it's doing, has a plan, has the resources at its disposal to pull it off.
Yeah.
The conclusions that the Luftwaffe draws is that we need to be more aggressive. You know, it's all the usual Nazi stuff. If only
Yeah.
if we were more aggressive,
We should just attack.
We would win. If we just attack, we'll
If we
win.
just, if we've just got the will to do it, it'll happen.
Yeah, and they're putting sort of big wings together and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they're making some similar mistakes. I mean, one of the most amazing statistics is in 1944, 9,000 German aircraft lost in transit. Not even going to battle, lost in transit to Allied aircraft action.
There you are.
That's how
Dominant they are.
How dominant they are.
And it's absolutely the case that if you were a German civilian and you were living in the western half of Germany, literally every day, you would not just see bombers, you would see fighter planes burning over, and that would, in a way, that gives you more of a sense of your defeat than the streams of bombers.
Well,
because the fighter planes, you can see them, they're low, they're kind of hedge hopping, they're sticking two fingers up at you.
Think of the nervous shock of German air power in 1940, in May 1940, that it had on British and French soldiers. You've got that every single day over the Reich, not over an army, over a civilian population. I mean, again, I come back to what I said a moment ago. How do you not know you've lost? How is a government able to keep this thing going when the writing is plainly on the wall at this point? Anyway, I think we've one more episode. There's a little thing for the listener. We have a clock telling us how long we've got, how long we've kept going, and we've overshot already.
There's definitely bonus content on this series.
Yeah, definitely.
Because normally we think, 40 minutes? We usually do 50.
Yeah.
We've been topping an hour every time, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, because it's
so interesting.
It's an incredible story. So interesting. Anyway, thanks for listening. We'll be back with From D-Day to VE Day.
Yep.
The last 8th Air Force sorties on the 25th of April.
25th of April, 1945.
So we'll try and get to there in our next episode. We'll see you soon. Cheerio.